Just ahead on this edition of Being Well, clinical psychologist Dr. Jerry Boyd will be here to talk about the connection between self-esteem and depression. We'll learn more about the origins of self-esteem and ways to develop and maintain good self-esteem throughout our lives. That's just ahead, so don't go away. Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Additional funding by Jazzercise of Charleston. Thanks for joining us for Being Well. I'm here with Dr. Jerry Boyd, a clinical psychologist. Tell us a little, before we get into the topic, just give us a little background on your practice and where you see patients.
Well, good morning, Lori. It's nice to see you. I'm a clinical psychologist in private practice. I work in a couple of different settings. I have a main office in Charleston that's open basically 5 days a week. 2 days a week I work in a family practice clinic in Effingham County. And so I'm kind of divided up between two places, actually.
Okay. Well, the focus of our topic today is the connection between self-esteem and anxiety and depression. Where does our self-esteem come from, and when do we start developing that?
Well, self-esteem is widely researched. There's been a lot of professional time spent on trying to understand it because there have been a lot of assumptions about how really important it is. But the general consensus, I think, amongst professionals is that there's a critical period for the development of self-esteem. It's probably in childhood. Mm-hmm. Self-esteem is related to things like self-concept. It's related to things like self-confidence. But those are also separate things, but they're interrelated. But I think that children learning that they're loved, children learning that they're good boys or good girls, that's probably the foundation of self-esteem. Mm-hmm. Getting praise, significantly more praise than criticism, I might add. Mm-hmm. Criticism has its place in the scheme of things, but certain kinds of criticism are destructive to self-esteem, whereas encouragement, support, feedback about a person's strengths especially, those are some of the building blocks of self-esteem, I guess you would say. But it really originates in childhood. That's probably the best way to put it. And I used the term critical phase or a critical period. What that really means is that if you don't get it as a child, it's much harder to acquire as an adult. Not impossible, but harder to acquire as an adult.
So when I did the research for this program, I typed in self-esteem and depression, and lots of things came up. And it seems to be, and I'll have you address this, it's a chicken or egg thing. Do you have low self-esteem? What affects one, or what does one cause is the cause of the other? What's your thoughts?
Well, that has been one of the primary investigations in the research I was describing. Mm-hmm. Meta-analysis of the research on self-esteem, I think in my review of the meta-analyses that have been done, and there have been several, where they look at all of the studies as a group and try to draw a conclusion. Instead of looking at one study and drawing a conclusion, they've tried to summarize the findings of multiple studies. And as is often the case, the results are often inconclusive. So is depression a cause or an effect of low self-esteem? Mm-hmm. The studies, I think, have consistently shown that most people who are depressed do have low self-esteem. But there's not compelling evidence that I am satisfied with that indicates that low self-esteem in and of itself will cause depression. Mm-hmm. The theories of depression are just that, they're theories. I don't know that we have facts about the origins of depression. I think we're fairly well convinced that heredity plays a role in depression. In other words, that if your parent or your grandparent suffer from depression, you have a higher probability of acquiring depression yourself. At the same time, though, if you are raised by a parent who has depression and low self-esteem, they'll be modeling depression and low self-esteem kinds of behaviors to children. And children we know are very impressionable, very receptive to especially multiple repetitions of behaviors that they can tend to acquire.
Well, let's talk about some of those low self-esteem behaviors that you probably have seen in some of your patients.
I think there are lots of them. I think it's difficult to narrow them down to a few. The main thing I would want to say about low self-esteem is that it's how you think about yourself. People can have a similar experience. For example, there's a general belief that a failure experience will result in low self-esteem. That's not necessarily true. It's how you interpret that failure experience. There are at least two camps on the subject of self-esteem and adversity. There's one camp of people who say that adversity actually strengthens your self-esteem, that it makes you not only a stronger, more competent person, but it also toughens you up.
Yeah, you get that tough exterior.
Gives you the capacity to be adaptable, which is certainly a life skill, to be adaptable, and that your self-esteem may be enhanced. Well, it's sort of like the idea that if you try out for an athletic team in grade school or high school or whenever it may be, and you get cut, you don't make it. In theory, being rejected could be something that could result in decreased self-esteem. But the camp that believes that adversity enhances your self-esteem would say that, well, you try again. And the next time you make the team, and then you have great self-esteem because you've learned that you can deal with adversity in your life and be successful. The problem with that is that there's some people who are not natural athletes and they're never going to make the team. And what people need instead of athletic success is something in their life that they feel that they're good at. You don't have to be the best at it, but you have to have a sense of competence. One component of low self-esteem and depression, since we started out talking about that thread, is a sense of lack of personal control. In other words, living in your world and you feel like you are like a cork on the ocean, where the whims of others, the events of life, fate, whatever you want to call it, is all beyond your control, that you are helpless and sort of hopeless to affect the kind of changes in your life that you want for yourself. That type of thinking is very related to low self-esteem, and it also is related to depression.
So you had said we develop our self-image, our self-esteem as children. So if you don't get that as a child, how can you develop it later in life? Well,
that's often a question. I don't have too many people who walk in the office saying, Dr. Boyd, would you improve my self-esteem? Most people come in saying, I've been terribly depressed. Life has been really difficult for me and I have trouble coping from day to day. In depression, clinical depression especially, it's not just a bad day or two. It's weeks or months of substantially down mood, loss of interest and pleasure, difficulties being motivated to deal with the activities of daily living. So it's a big difference, clinical depression and a bad day or two, that all of us have those bad days or two. Up to 5 or 6% of the population or more may suffer from clinical depression at any given time. So the answer really to your question about how do you acquire it as an adult if you didn't get all of that you needed as a child, I think there's several things a person can do. One of the things that we talk to people about is sort of developing a list of what it is what's good about you. I mean, make an inventory of what your strengths are. And there's some people, when we're working on their self-esteem as a part of treating their depression, is we'll actually have them write it out, and typically on something like a note card or half of a note card even, pretty small print maybe, and then laminate it. And when they're feeling down or when they're feeling ineffective or putting themselves down, we'll have them pull it out, read it to themselves a couple of times to refresh themselves with the idea that, look, there really are some good things about me. So being positive with yourself is an important way as an adult, not just to acquire some self-esteem, but to maintain the self-esteem that you have. I think it's easy for people to become self-critical And heaven knows that there's plenty of people who will criticize us, in various ways. And social media, and the media that we watch every day in the form of television. The models.
Not this show.
Not this show,
No.
of course. I wasn't
Not
thinking of
public
that. This is one of the rare exceptions, of
Okay.
course. And anyway, of course, I think that we look at, for example, the models, role models that we have for our adolescents, of how they should dress and how they should look and how their hair should be, or what their physical prowess should be in the males or females too. The girls' athletics has grown tremendously, and it's extremely competitive and still doesn't yet offer the rewards that I think it should for young female athletes, but it's come a long way from what it was. Point being, though, that the expectations are so far and people never quite reach and get that sense of success and satisfaction. And I think being able to reach and attain goals and setting goals reasonably so that they aren't unattainable is an important part of obtaining and preserving self-esteem. There are some really basic things about getting self-esteem and preserving self-esteem, and it's hard for me to really separate the getting and preserving because I think most people have some. It just may not be a lot. And most of us don't have too much self-esteem as far as that's concerned. We may, on the outside, seem very confident, but most of us have our insecurities that we carry around and tend to try to conceal because we feel vulnerable when they're exposed. But I think the basic things I'm talking about are to live a basic healthy lifestyle, get enough sleep, exercise regularly, eat on a reasonable diet, associate with other people. It's really important to have a circle of friends in your life that are supportive of you. Our family isn't always so supportive. I think that we're supposed to know that they love us. We're supposed to know that they would be there for us if we need them. But actually, I think very often those assumptions exist, but that is also sort of like a green light for people who love us to say things to us that hurt us more deeply than people that we don't really know or don't really care about. And so I'm not suggesting people should distance themselves from their family, but I'm suggesting that we do need to surround ourselves with people who like us and who treat us respectfully. And if there's people in your life who don't treat you respectfully on a consistent basis, or who are abusive to you in one way or another, then I am an advocate of talking with that person about the nature of the relationship, try to repair it if it's possible. But if you make several efforts and it's not possible, then I think it's important to know when to say when.
Yeah, to move on. To
move on to other healthy relationships.
I want to talk about, you brought it up earlier, social media.
Yes.
We see in social media what everyone's doing and how great their life is. Are you finding in some of your patients that that's for people with some self-esteem issues, that reading that news feed of how wonderful so-and-so's husband is and their kids are great and all these beautiful pictures of their vacation, that's really detrimental or difficult for people?
It's a two-edged sword, I think. There are some people for whom it's very comforting to know that this is a possibility, that they can, if other people can be happy, maybe I can too. That if other people can have a supportive network of friends who care about them, then maybe I can too. So on the one hand, it could display that this isn't an accomplishable task. On the other hand, I think sometimes people say, that the world looks so perfect that my world will never be that perfect.
Right.
And so, again, as I said earlier in our discussion, self-esteem is how you think about what happens and what you perceive. That determines how you will feel about it. So if you think of it in a positive way, then it may be a helpful thing. The biggest, gripe I have about the combining self-esteem and social media, when you put those two words in the same sentence, would be adolescence. Adolescents live and die by Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and other relatively immediate forms of communication, cell phone too, but the social media such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are much less personal. You don't have to have a face-to-face to be able to say an impulsive remark that could be very, very hurtful, or a well thought out remark that's very, very hurtful. And it goes into the stratosphere and people don't get to see the reaction or the hurt of the respondee. But the adolescents are where I tend to see the greatest impact, and it can be disastrous. So parents need to supervise their kids' social media. If you're a parent and you don't know what Instagram is, I urge you to learn. If you have
there's new ones, there's new things all the time. You can't hardly keep up with them.
But if you're not informed about it, then you can't be very good at holding them accountable for their behavior on social media. So social media in itself is not evil by any means. It's a useful way for people to communicate and maintain relationships that sometimes are at long distance, but it's abused also.
So how would you talked about parents, how would you address a parent whose child may be struggling with self-esteem, but maybe the parent themselves is struggling also with self-esteem? It's creeping into the next generation. How do you go about changing that cycle?
Well, I think change starts in the home. I think it's important for parents to realize that your example will convey and teach much more than your words ever will to your child. And when I say child, I'm talking about under the age of 20. Okay. I think that if you see in your child evidence of low self-esteem, it's worthwhile to ask yourself, is that an issue that I have? Yes, exactly. Is that an issue that I have? And I think there are a lot of good books on the topic. I think that looking at some of the resources that are out there, such as the books I've just described, I think there are many highly rated books on various of the internet sites where you can purchase books. And I think join with your child to do a study of it together. You know, and
talk about what are your strengths, what you think makes you a good person.
And be honest with your child about the fact that it's been a deficit for you. Talk to your child about how it's held you back in various ways, or how it feels. Just share. And I think that getting it out on the table makes it something that it's approachable at that point. But when something is so painful or scary that people can't even talk about it, it's hard to address it.
So at what point do you recommend people seek professional help, whether it's a parent or an adult seeking help for themselves, or maybe a parent seeking help for their child? When is it beyond something that you can fix yourself?
Well, the simple answer to your question is whenever it starts affecting major life areas.
Okay.
In other words, if the symptoms are so pronounced that a child isn't eating, or if a child has developed compulsive overeating due to low self-esteem, for example, or contributed to it. There's never a single causative factor there's rarely a single causative factor in human behavior. But whenever it affects a major life area, eating, sleeping, if sleeping is greatly disturbed, if a child is socially avoidant and doesn't have friends, or if you see evidence in an adult that that they are withdrawing from whatever social network they may have had before, missing work, personal hygiene deteriorating, basic, important life areas. So whenever it starts to interfere with that, then that's an indication to talk to your family doctor. My general belief is that people should start by speaking to their family physician. Family physicians know your total health history. They often know other family history, and they're the entry point, in my opinion, for the mental health system. They can rule out some things that look like depression, for example, can be
a medical.
Exactly, can be a condition like hypothyroidism, or certain kinds of other conditions that can mimic or masquerade as a mental health issue and not get addressed because people write it off as, well, it's only depression. Well, depression is a serious thing. And I think one of the things that people fail to realize is that in combination with low self-esteem and certain other risk factors, there's a mortality rate associated with depression. People die of depression.
Really?
Yes, they do. And so it's a very serious condition that should not be overlooked. Now, not everybody who's depressed is going to be suicidal. That's not my message here. But my point is that depression is very treatable. Many of the cardinal studies on depression have indicated that 93% of people with depression will benefit significantly from treatment. And in severe depression, a combination of appropriate medicines and psychotherapy produces tremendous relief for people that are suffering and not functioning at their full capabilities.
Are we seeing more depression and anxiety in our society, or is it that people are just more open about it, do you think?
I think on the depression angle that people are more open about it. Anxiety, though, we have a lot to be anxious about. We live in a world where, again, like I said earlier, communication is instantaneous. And so what happens in the Ukraine, what happens in Afghanistan, what happens in Mexico City, or wherever we would be talking about, or in Los Angeles where there's a mass shooting again, or any major city in the United States, we're instantly aware of that. And there was a time, of course, certainly not in recent history, but we were more protected from those kinds of news items. Not that these things didn't occur, but yes, I do think that people are more anxious because they have an awareness that there's more to be anxious about.
Yeah. Let's talk in these last few minutes. Just give us some last few tips about what we can do to develop and maintain good self-esteem.
Okay, and I'll kind of piggyback on the things I talked about earlier. It's really important, I think, to be positive with yourself. At the end of the day, you're supposed to be your own best friend.
Which is tough some days.
It's very tough because we're excruciatingly aware of our faults and shortcomings. And most of us are driven to be successful and to be popular and to be well regarded by others, and I think sometimes we operate with very unrealistic beliefs. There was an author and a famous psychologist named Dr. Albert Ellis, and he listed, actually came up with a list of over 120 irrational ideas that cause people to be not mentally healthy, and one of them was that everybody should love me for everything that I do all of the time. And he said, if you really, even if subconsciously you believe that that's so, you're going to be often disappointed and depressed. So being realistic with yourself, not everybody's going to love you all the time. And if you stand for anything, there may be a lot of people who don't like you for it. And at the same time, you also do need to examine your own behavior, because we can slide into negativity ourselves with others, and we don't want to be a source of someone else's contributing low self-esteem. So in addition to basic self-care, I think it's a very, very important thing is to do things for other people, do nice things for other people, volunteer, be somebody who is the supporter of others, somebody who tries to say, hey, I believe in you, you're really a good person. Go out of your way to catch people doing something right. So often we're quick to judge people, to find what's wrong. I say, try hard to catch somebody doing something right and call their attention to it. I think that for people close to you, I think holding someone's hand or putting your arm around their shoulder when at a time of discouragement, you don't have to go volunteer in a big agency. There's lots of ways to give of yourself to others. I think, as I said earlier, spending time with people who are good company to you, that's if you don't remember anything else I said today, that would be the one to hang on to. Surround yourself with people that are good to you. Surround yourself with people where it's a sort of a mutual admiration society where people are there for each other. And that's easier said than done for some people. Some people, especially if they have low self-esteem, are pretty shy.
Yeah. Or gravitate towards other people that are like that.
I think so, because if you feel like a failure, you don't want to surround yourself with people who are high achievers, simply because you're going to feel all the time, you're going to feel pretty inadequate. But you don't want to do the opposite either, where you surround yourself with people who are functioning at a much lower level than you are, because we tend to sometimes gravitate toward a lower common denominator.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Boyd, thank you so much for stopping by, being well, and giving us some good information and advice on developing and maintaining good self-esteem.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Terrorisms, shootings, international unrest, the world is full of turmoil right now, and for some, that's a lot of pressure to handle. But mental health experts say there are ways you can deal with stress so it doesn't become a serious problem. Here's Holly Furfer with today's Health Minute.
It's a tough world out there, and for some people, all this upheaval can be upsetting. Many become stressed out, but psychologists say there are ways you can deal with anxiety that can keep depression away. Exercise. Doctors say the best thing to do is to keep busy and get the endorphins pumping, which can make anyone feel better. Watch your salt and sugar. Lowering both of these in your diet helps your whole body work better, including your brain. Get more vitamin D. Studies have shown that a lack of vitamin D can add to the blues. Best way to get vitamin D? From the sun. So get out for short periods of time and enjoy the outdoors. Hang with friends or loved ones. Being around people you like can make you a happier person. And relax. Try a yoga class or meditation. Research shows that even 15 minutes of meditation can cut down on stress. And if you find things do not get better, seek professional help. Depression is a serious condition, but it can be treated. For today's Health Minute, I'm Holly Furfer.
Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Additional funding by Jazzercise of Charleston.